Welcome to our C# Programming for Beginners course. Whether you're completely new to programming or looking to expand your skills, this course is designed to guide you through the fundamentals and beyond. The course is structured into several modules, each focusing on key aspects of C# programming. Module 1, set up your environment and get familiar with Visual Studio. Module 2, start programming with basic syntax and structure. Module 3, explore data types and variables. Module 4, working with strings and more. Module 5, use flow controls with if statements, loops, and other control structures. Module 6, using functions and methods to write reusable code. Module 7, learn object-oriented programming with classes, objects, and more. Module 8, handling and debugging errors. Module 9, file I/O. Along the way, you will also learn some finer tricks of the trade to make writing C# code easier. Make sure to code along with the tutorials. Practice is key. Try out different things and experiment with the code. It's a great way to learn. Regular practice will help reinforce what you learn. Let's get started and happy learning. In this module, we'll take a look at how you install and set up Visual Studio on your machine. We show you the steps involved when creating a new project. Then we take a look at the various parts of the development environment and how to set up additional helpful views in Visual Studio. We'll explain how these views can assist you when you're writing code. Then we'll run the application from within and outside of Visual Studio. Finally, we take a brief look at the build function. But first, let's install Visual Studio. We'll be using Visual Studio to develop our applications. This is the professional development environment for developing .NET applications. Specifically, we'll be using the Visual Studio Community Edition. Visual Studio Community is a free, fully featured integrated development environment, or IDE, for individual developers, students, and open source projects to create applications. To install Visual Studio Community, go to visualstudio.microsoft.com/vs/community. Click on the Download button and run the installer. Follow the instructions for installing Visual Studio. When prompted to select workloads, select the .NET Desktop Development workload. This is the only workload we require at this time. You can always install more workloads later when needed. For example, if you're doing web applications, you can install the Web Development workload. Then, click the Install button. The installation will take a few moments, and you may have to restart to complete the installation. After installation has completed, open Visual Studio. If Visual Studio is already open, click File, then New Project from the top menu. On the Open or Create page, select Create a New Project on the bottom of the list on the right. On the Create a New Project page, select C#, All Platforms and Console from the drop-downs at the top right. Then, from the list of available project templates, select Console App. Click the Next button. On the Configure Your New Project page, give your project an appropriate name. Avoid using special characters or spaces. This name will be used for your executable program name. Then, select a location where you want to store your C# projects. Visual Studio will create a new folder with your solution's name inside the selected location. The solution name can be the same as the project name. Leave the Place Solution and Project in the same folder box unticked. Click the Next button. On the Additional Information page, select the latest long-term support framework from the Framework drop-down list. In this case, it was .NET 8. Make sure to tick the Do Not Use Top-Level Statements box. Also, untick the Enable Native AOT Publish box. Finally, click the Create button. When Visual Studio opens for the first time, you'll be greeted with a What's New page. You can close this page by clicking the small X on the tab header above the page. Initially, the IDE has 3 sections: the top menu and toolbar, the center editor where you'll be writing your code, and a Solution Explorer on the right side, which will display your project's file layout. But we also need the error list and output windows. If they are not displayed, click on the View menu at the top and click Error List. Do the same for output. The error list will display errors and suggestions for us while we are writing code. Once your application is created, the IDE will open and display the program.cs file in the center editor. The program.cs file is the starting point of your application. All C# code files will have the extension CS. On the right is the Solution Explorer, which shows a layout of all the components in your solution. On the first line, it shows your solution name, and in brackets, it shows that you currently have one project in your solution. More complex solutions may contain multiple projects. For example, a web application may contain a front-end project for developing the user interface and a back-end API project for dealing with data queries for the front-end UI. Following that is your project name, and inside your project is a dependencies folder. The dependencies are files that Visual Studio uses to analyze and compile the code you write. It may also contain any third-party pre-written code libraries that you may install. Following the dependencies is the program.cs file, the file currently open in the editor. If you close the program.cs file in the editor by clicking on the small X next to its name in the tab header, you can reopen the file by clicking on the file name in the Solution Explorer. At the bottom of the IDE is the error list. If this is not displayed, remember you can add it by going to the View menu at the top and selecting Error List. Do the same for Output. At the bottom of the Error List area, there should now be an Error List tab and Output tab. Select the Error List tab. In the Error List, you can toggle to display errors, warnings, messages, or any combination of these. With messages toggled, you should see one message in the list, indicated by a blue circle with an I in it. This is some helpful information the IDE is giving you. It suggests you can remove the args parameter since it's not used by your code. It also shows you the project name, file name, and line within that file where the incident occurs. With the program.cs file open in the editor, look at line 5. You will notice that args has 3 dots below it, indicating there's some information the editor has regarding this piece of code. If you hover your mouse cursor over the args word, a pop-up will display with more information. This code created by the template is ready to run. When executing or running an application, the IDE will perform 3 tasks. Save all the changes you've made to all the files you've edited. Build or compile any code that have changed. This converts your source code into a language that can be understood by your machine. While compiling, it will check for any errors in your code and will not execute the application until all errors are fixed. Once there's no more errors in the error list, Visual Studio will run your application. To run the application, click the solid green play button on the top toolbar. You can also press F5. Keep an eye on the bottom status bar of Visual Studio as it compiles and builds your application. The first time your application is compiled and built may take slightly longer since it needs to compile your entire project. The next time you run, Visual Studio only needs to compile the changes you've made to your source code and will be faster. Since this is a console application, Visual Studio will open a console window to display the results of your running application. If you only saw a quick flash and now console window appears, it means Visual Studio ran your application, got to the end, and then closed it. In this case, try running it with the outlined play button or by pressing Ctrl and F5. Once the application has ran, the console window will output the result. The code simply displays the words "Hello World." Below that, it shows from where your application was run and that it completed and exited with code 0, which means there was no errors. Finally, it waits for you to press any key so it can close the application and return to the IDE. Let's take a look at the files and folders of your project in the file system. Depending on whether you're using Mac or Windows, the example may look slightly different. We're using Windows for this example. Open the File Explorer in Windows or its equivalent if you're using Mac. Navigate to the location you specified for your project. Here you can see that Visual Studio created a solution folder, and inside the solution folder is the project folder. Inside the project folder are your source code and project file. It also contains an object folder with files used by Visual Studio and a bin folder for storing your final binary compiled application. When you dig all the way down into the bin folder, you'll get to the executable file of your application. If you built this executable on a Windows machine, you can copy and run it on any other Windows machine. The same applies to Mac. Note that you can configure your application to build executables for multiple operating systems, but at this time, we won't be covering it in the beginner's tutorial. Let's see how we can run our application outside of Visual Studio in a console. For Windows, you can use the command prompt, and for Mac, you can use the Terminal app. We'll be using Windows command prompt for this demonstration. After opening the command prompt window, we navigate to the location of our executable file in the directory structure. Then we enter the -dir command just to list us the files in that directory. Next, we simply enter the name of our executable file and hit Enter or Return. The application is executed, and as expected, it writes the words "Hello World" to the console. In future videos, you'll learn how to create proper applications with Windows buttons, input boxes, drop-down lists, and all those niceties. For now, in this beginner's course, we're focusing on learning the fundamentals of C#. Back in the IDE, sometimes you only want to build your application without running it. This is handy, especially with large projects, when you simply need to see if the compiler picks up any new errors after you've made changes. To build your application without running it, go to the Build menu item and select Build Solution. You can also press Ctrl-Shift-B. When you build, take notice of the status bar at the bottom. It will show that Visual Studio is busy building, and once it's done, it will display Build Succeeded if there were no error. If you click on the Output tab in the Error List area, Visual Studio will give you more information regarding your last build. If the output displays 0 succeeded, it means you didn't make any changes to your project and Visual Studio had nothing to build. It will display 0 projects failed if there were no errors. Thank you for watching this module of the C# Beginners tutorial. We hope it was informative and educational. Should any of the concepts not be fully clear, please go back to the relevant section and watch it again. To continue on the course, check out the links below in the description for the next module. Remember to click the like button and subscribe to our channel to stay up to date with the latest new content at Learn with James.